We've got a story here, and it's a tough one. It's about a father fighting for his daughter's well-being. We're gonna deep dive into his account, really look at what he's saying, and see if we can make sense of the bigger picture, what it all means.
Yeah, and it's important to remember that we're only getting one side of this. It's a complex situation.
Of course.
But even so, it brings up some really important questions about, how these systems that are supposed to protect kids actually work in real life, when things get messy.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's get into the specifics. At the heart of it, this is a story about a divorce, a custody battle, and a father who says he was basically shut out of his daughter's life.
Right. And you can really hear the impact it had on him. He talks about crying tears of joy when he finally got custody after all those years of limited contact. No, it's really powerful stuff.
It is. So can you walk us through what happened, chronologically, just based on what the father's telling us?
Well, it seems like the initial separation is really where things went wrong. The father alleges that his ex-wife and her boyfriend at the time, they kind of orchestrated this whole thing where he was basically evicted from their home.
And that led to the mother getting full custody of their daughter.
Yeah, that's what he says.
Okay, so from there, the father claims he was constantly blocked from seeing his daughter.
Right. He says he was threatened with legal action for even trying to do simple things like giving her a gift at school.
Wow.
He also says that his ex-wife gave their daughter the COVID-19 vaccine and he never consented to it.
Wait, hold on a sec. Wouldn't that be a violation of his parental rights, especially if they were already, in a custody battle?
Yeah, that's exactly the point he's making. He sees it as her completely disregarding his role as a parent. And, it could be a safety concern, right? So it definitely brings up some tricky questions about, who gets to make medical decisions when parents are separated.
Definitely. And this is all before the mother moved to Dubai with the daughter, right?
Exactly. And the father says he had absolutely no idea she was doing this. He says she basically kidnapped their daughter. He had to get lawyers involved. He even threatened to call Interpol to get her back to Canada.
That's intense. So what was the daughter's life like during that time in Dubai?
Well, based on what the father says, it sounds incredibly isolating. He says she had her phone and computer taken away, destroyed, to stop her from contacting him. There are even allegations of physical abuse. There's this one incident where the daughter had to bite her mother to get away, during a violent altercation.
Oh, man, that's just awful. And this abuse didn't stop when they came back to Canada.
Sadly, no. The father gives some specific examples. He says his daughter told him about being slapped so hard her face went numb, and that she was constantly being verbally abused by her mother.
Okay, so we're seeing a pattern here, right? Allegations of isolation, control, physical and emotional abuse. This is starting to sound a lot like what you mentioned earlier about parental alienation. Can you remind us what that means exactly?
Sure. So parental alienation is when one parent tries to damage the relationship a child has with the other parent, often by manipulating them, putting the other parent down constantly.
Right.
And it can be incredibly damaging for the kid, for their emotional well-being, their sense of family, everything.
And how do the father's claims fit into that?
Well, think about it. Those alleged attempts to prevent contact, the threats of legal action, even the mother allegedly telling the daughter she could only talk to her father when she turned 18, it all points in that direction, right?
It does. And it gets worse. The father says he never got any of the letters his daughter wrote to him while she was living with her mom.
Yeah, that's heartbreaking, right? It really shows how alienation can completely sever that bond between a parent and child.
It really does. And it sounds like the father felt completely powerless, especially when it came to his daughter's safety. He talks about how frustrated he was with the family court system, believing that they didn't protect his daughter even though he reported what was happening.
It's something you hear a lot from parents who are dealing with these systems. It can be really tough to prove abuse is happening, and there's always that risk that reports get dismissed or downplayed.
So, why wouldn't a report be dismissed, even if abuse is actually going on?
Sometimes there just isn't enough evidence, or the evidence that's there that's misinterpreted. And then there's the issue of bias, Conscious or unconscious, it can definitely influence how claims are evaluated.
In this case, the father says that he thinks gender stereotypes played a role, that the courts tend to favor mothers in custody battles. What are your thoughts on that?
It's a serious accusation for sure. But, it's important to remember that no system is perfect, right? There can be systemic issues, and we can't rule out the possibility of bias, intentional or not, in some cases.
Yeah, that's fair. The father also claims that his ex-wife was motivated by money, that she wanted to keep custody so she could get child support and government benefits, even if it meant keeping him away from their daughter.
Yeah, financial factors can definitely make custody disputes even more complicated. I mean, whether that was her main motivation, we can't know for sure, but it's something to consider, you know? It's another piece of the puzzle.
It is. So with all this going on, what was the turning point in the story?
Well, according to the father, everything changed when the mother kicked their daughter out of her house, basically disowned her.
And that's when she went to live with her dad.
Right.
And that's when he really started to understand just how much she was struggling.
Yeah, he talks about how she showed up with hardly any belongings, like just 2 bags of clothes, even though his ex-wife was, supposedly living this lavish lifestyle. It really highlights the difference between what the mother was allegedly focused on and, what the daughter actually needed.
That's a powerful image. It really does support what he's saying about potential neglect. Her needs coming second to her mother's wants.
Exactly.
It sounds like this move, though, was just the start of a whole other difficult chapter.
Oh, absolutely. Next, we're going to talk about what the daughter went through while she was living with her father, the impact all the alleged abuse had on her mental health. We'll talk about her social anxiety, her problems in school, even thoughts of suicide.
This is already a lot to take in. Before we move on, is there anything else about the daughter's time with her mother that we should touch on?
Well, there is one more detail from the father's account that really stands out. He says his daughter was forced to babysit her 1-year-old sister when she was only 5 years old.
5. Oh, man. That's alarming. What kind of impact could something like that have?
It raises some serious concerns about neglect, like giving a child responsibilities that are way beyond their capabilities at that age. A 5-year-old can't handle taking care of a baby. It could be really damaging emotionally and psychologically.
So we've got this web of potential abuse, control, neglect. It's a pretty disturbing picture of what the daughter might have gone through. What's next?
Next, we're going to look at some specific examples from the father's story that really illustrate these issues. We've talked about parental alienation in a general sense, but let's see how it might have actually played out in this case.
Okay, let's do it. This is important stuff.
Okay, so we've got this web of potential abuse, control, and neglect. It paints a pretty disturbing picture of what the daughter might have gone through. What's next?
Yeah, so, where do we go from here?
Well, next we're going to dive into some specific examples from the father's story, things that really illustrate these issues. We've talked about parental alienation, broadly, but let's see how it might have actually happened in this specific case.
Okay, yeah, let's get into that. What are some of the details that really stand out to you?
Well, aside from everything we've already talked about, the father mentions this really stark difference between his daughter's belongings when she came to live with him and his ex-wife's lifestyle. He said his daughter arrived with, just 2 bags of clothes, including a single pair of sneakers that a neighbor had given her. And this was despite the mother supposedly having, all this money.
Yeah, that's a pretty jarring image. It does seem to back up what he's saying about potential neglect. The mother putting her own needs ahead of her daughter's.
Right. And then there are the allegations of actual incidents of abuse. The father talks about this situation in Dubai where the daughter had to physically defend herself against her mother.
Uh-huh.
And she ended up biting her.
And the father claims the mother then used that bite mark as proof that the daughter was violent.
Exactly. And supposedly the daughter wasn't allowed to document her own injuries or anything because her phone and computer had been taken away.
Man, it really makes you think about how easy it can be to manipulate a situation like that, and how important it is to hear both sides.
For sure.
So there's also the repeated emotional abuse that the father talks about. He claims the mother was constantly putting her down, calling her names, saying things like she was worthless, stupid, even telling her that she should have been born.
Yeah. Stuff like that can be really damaging to a kid's self-esteem. Hearing that kind of stuff over and over again, especially from a parent, it can have a lasting impact.
It makes you wonder how much of that was going on all those years when the father didn't have this contact. It's no wonder he says his daughter is struggling with insomnia now and having trouble focusing at school. He even said she had thoughts of suicide.
Yeah, it's really sad. The father also says his daughter still seems to believe some of the things her mother said, Even when he tries to reassure her, tell her how great she is, she doesn't believe it. It shows how deep those scars can go.
So we've got this really devastating picture emerging, but then, according to the father, there's a major development. He's granted full custody of his daughter in September 2023. That's got to be a huge relief for him, right?
Absolutely. It's a step in the right direction, for sure, getting her out of that environment. But it's also important to realize that, getting custody isn't a cure-all.
Right. It's not going to magically fix everything.
Exactly. It's just the beginning of what's probably going to be a long and really tough healing process. He's basically having to start from scratch with their relationship and try to address all the trauma she's experienced. He even said he has to wake her up every morning and convince her to go to school because she was thinking about dropping out.
Yeah, he mentions that she failed all of her ninth grade classes, which, I mean, it makes sense given everything that was going on, but it also makes you realize just how much catching up they have to do.
It does. It's amazing that he's taking all this on, though. Taking her to therapy, helping her with school, encouraging her to do things that might build her confidence.
Okay, so let's step back for a minute. We've covered a lot of heavy stuff. What are the main takeaways here for our listeners? What do you hope they're getting out of this?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that parental alienation is a real problem, and it can have a devastating impact on kids. And it's usually way more complicated than it seems on the surface. There's a lot going on behind the scenes.
Yeah. And it's also a reminder that even those systems that are supposed to protect kids, like family courts, don't always get it right. There could be bias, there could be delays, misunderstandings that can lead to kids getting hurt.
And finally, I think this is a call for compassion and understanding. We're only hearing the father side of this. We can't know the whole story, but it definitely makes you think about how complicated these situations can be and, how important it is to have systems that really put kids first.
Yeah, no doubt. This has been heavy. I'm wondering, is there any advice you can give to someone who might be going through something similar? Someone dealing with parental alienation or worried about a kid in their life? What can they do?
Well, I'd say the most important thing is don't give up. Keep fighting for yourself, for your kids, document everything, get a good lawyer, find some support groups, organizations that specialize in parental alienation or child abuse.
It can feel really lonely when you're going through something like this, but it's important to remember that you're not alone. There are people and resources out there that can help.
Exactly. And remember, healing takes time. Be patient with yourself, be patient with your kids. Focus on building that safe and loving environment where everyone can start to heal and move forward.
I think that's a really important message. Before we wrap up, is there anything else about the daughter's experience living with her father or her, her recovery that we should talk about? I think that's a really important message. Before we wrap up, is there anything else about the daughter's experience living with her father or her, her recovery that we should talk about?
Yeah, there are a few more things. Things that really show how this alleged alienation and abuse have affected her, long term. The father says she has really bad social anxiety. She can barely speak in public.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, she has trouble making eye contact, even interacting with kids her own age. He says he often has to step in and talk for her in social situations.
That's so sad. It really shows you how much damage can be done. The things that happen to us as kids, they can impact us our whole lives. It's not something you can just shake off easily.
No, it's not. And healing from that kind of trauma takes time. You need patience, support, the whole 9 yards. And the father is definitely trying his best to give her that. But it's a tough road. He talks about how she's always worried about what people think of her, how she doesn't trust anyone outside the family.
It's like she's still carrying all those negative messages, like the things her mother said to her. Stuck in this cycle of self-doubt and fear.
Exactly. And breaking out of that cycle is the key to her recovery. The father's encouraging her to get involved in things that might help, build her confidence. Maybe joining a sports team or volunteering.
Yeah, that makes sense. Giving her those chances to have positive experiences, build up her self-esteem.
Right. And just showing her that she's capable, that she's loved no matter what. Helping her trust herself again, trust the world around her.
This whole story, it's really about resilience, isn't it? For both of them, the daughter and the father. He fought so hard to protect her, and now he's doing everything he can to help her heal.
It is. It's a reminder that even when things are really bad, there's still hope. People can overcome trauma. Families can rebuild, find a way to create something new, something healthier.
This deep dive has been, it's been eye-opening for sure, but it's also been pretty heavy, Talking about parental alienation, child abuse, the family court system. It's tough stuff.
It is, and it's important to remember that, this is just one story, but it represents something that a lot of families go through. It's a reminder that we need to be more aware of these things, more understanding, more supportive of the people who are struggling with this kind of stuff.
Absolutely. So as we wrap things up here, what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from this deep dive?
I guess if I had to pick one thing, it would be this. Every kid deserves to feel safe, loved, and protected. If you see something that seems wrong, don't be afraid to say something. Whether it's reporting abuse or just offering support to a family that's struggling, whatever you can do can make a difference.
And to anyone out there who's going through something similar, who's feeling lost and alone, please remember, you're not alone. There are resources out there, people who want to help. Talk to a friend, a family member, a therapist. There are so many organizations that are dedicated to supporting families in crisis.
Help is out there, and don't ever give up hope. Keep fighting for yourself, for your kids.
Well said. That's all the time we have for today's deep dive. Thanks for listening.